صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على Muhammad. Can we begin with a loud salawat in honor of the commander of the faithful, Ali ibn Abi Talib, salawatullah wa salamuhu alayhi. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. Thank you so much. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين. الحمد لله الذي هدانا لهذا وما كنا لنهتدي لولا أن هدانا الله. والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين خاتم النبيين سيدنا الممجد بشير المصدق المصطفى الأمجد محمود الأحمد أبي القاسم محمد. اللهم صل على وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين ولعن الله على الظالمين من الأولين والآخرين. أما بعد، فقد قال الله سبحانه وتعالى في كتابه المجيد وفرقانه الحميد وقوله الحق. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اليوم أكملت لكم دينكم وأتممت عليكم نعمتي ورضيت لكم الإسلام دينا. آمنا بالله. صدق الله العلي العظيم. صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل. Awaited Savior of humanity, Imam al-Hujjah, my respected teachers, elders, brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum jami'an wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. First and foremost, on this joyous occasion in which we celebrate the main announcement, the final great announcement and coronation ceremony of the Commander of the Faithful, being placed as the successor of Rasulullah Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wasallam, being Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib salawatullah wa salamuhu alayhi. Our congratulations goes out to the Imam of our time. Our congratulations goes out to our ulama and to, of course, humanity as a whole, as all of us of any area, any location, any time, any gender can take virtue from Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salatu wassalam. Our discussion this evening, inshallah, will be a historical-based discussion. And what we want to do is try to assess and understand the greater context of the event of Ghadeer. When we say context, we mean that every incident and every verse that is revealed, the Holy Quran, must have a greater context to it. And thus we appreciate normally Ghadeer in a very restricted or confined context. We normally just leave the event of Ghadeer as being that after the ceremonies of Hajj that Rasulullah stopped and announced that this was the end of the event. But of course, in terms of history, there must have been events that preceded this event, and therefore those events were the reasonings and the cause for the event of Ghadeer. Because the question could be posed as to, well, what is the evaluation of Ghadeer beyond just the event of Ghadeer? Or what indeed could be the reason as to why the events of Ghadeer took place in the way in which they did? Because theologically we could state one of two things. We could state that either Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in His wisdom, in His knowledge of all things, dictated events to be in such a way that, of course, that as a result, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala decided a culmination of events which concluded in the revelation in the way in which it did, and thus the coronation ceremony taking place in that way. Or we could say that the events occurred naturally, that of course as Islam unfolded, events were to take place, and of course Rasulullah being a human being needed to react to that. Or of course Islam in its completion reacted to those circumstances in its own nature, in accordance with what was taking place around it. From the Sunni context, when we analyze their interpretation of Man kuntum mawla fahadun aliyun mawla, we of course notice that the general conception is that the word mawla is translated as to friend. And of course from the Ahl al-Tashayyu' perspective, we translate this word as being an authoritative translation, being master. Of course, the question will be posed is, well, why do we translate these words? Is it just within the context of the language, or was there something greater taking place before the event of Ghadeer, which allowed for our brothers and sisters in the Sunni community to interpret the word as friendship? The reality is that Ghadeer didn't just take place, and one fine day Rasulullah stopped everybody and announced the appointment and selection of the commander of the faithful. There must have been events preceding this particular event that caused the interpretation to be one way or the other. Because if it's just a discussion based upon language, then of course normally, in terms of how language is, we don't have too many debates over it. We tend to know what the outcome of language is. But the reason as to why the event of Ghadeer has taken on such a historical analysis is because the event is greater than just the words Man kuntu mawla fahadan aliyun mawla. There is a greater historical context. And thus the question we want to pose tonight is, what are those events that took place historically in the immediate past, preceding the event of Ghadeer? And how did that shape the context of the event of Ghadeer itself? And so, the event, or from the lifetime of Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam, the great event that took place immediately prior to the farewell Hajj was his deputation towards the area of Yemen. Many of us may have heard this or studied this, but this had a huge factor in the life of Imam Ali alayhi salam in terms of the event leading up to Ghadeer, but even so much up until his very death itself. What was to transpire in Yemen immediately before the event of Ghadeer would have such an impact on the plains of Ghadeer and also right through in the final moments of his life. This event normally in history is titled the deputation of Ali to Yemen, or the deputation of the commander of the faithful to the area of Yemen. Yemen, of course, as we know today, vast piece of land, but in terms of historical context, there were 2 or 3 main tribes that lived in the area of Yemen. The most famous and probably dominating tribe was the tribe called Banu Hamdan. And other than that, there was also another tribe by the name of Banu Rabi'a. Banu Rabi'a was a very large tribe and had other sub-tribes underneath it, similar to how we would say that the Quraysh was a group and underneath Quraysh were dozens of tribes that made up the Quraysh. Banu Rabi'a was another very large tribe in the area of Yemen, and underneath them there were dozens of other small sub-tribes. Of course, historically, Yemen has a massive role to play in the idea of Imam Ali alayhi salam's history. I just want to show you how significant Yemen was in terms of the future of Imam Ali alayhi salam, what he accomplished with them, and then go back to the events pertaining to his deputation to Yemen that of course was going to impact the event of Ghadeer. In Nahj al-Balagha, letter number 74, there is a particular letter that describes a treaty that was constructed by Imam Ali alayhi salam between these 2 great tribes, mainly between Banu Rabi'a and the other groups within Yemen. This, of course, took place when he was the caliph, as to when he was coming towards the latter part of his life. But if you and I were to just pick up Nahj al-Balagha and read letter number 74, we would say to ourselves, okay, he has created an agreement, he has reached a peace treaty between 2 arguing and warring tribes with each other. He did that, why? And our spontaneous answer might be, well, he did this because he was the caliph, and therefore because Yemen came under the geographical rule of the Khilafat, of course the 2 tribes respected Ali, and therefore they were happy to go and put this peace treaty together. The reality is other than this, that they had known of Imam Ali alayhi salam for years before, respected Imam Ali alayhi salam for years before, and therefore they looked forward to him brokering this peace treaty between the 2 of them. His relationship started with Banu Rabi'a. His relationship started with Yemen from the time in which he was deputed towards Yemen just prior to the event of Ghadeer. Let us just read this particular peace treaty so we get to know it and see the beauty of the leadership of Imam Ali alayhi salam. He says, this peace treaty contains what the people of Yemen, including all of its townsmen, all of its Bedouins, and all of its nomads, and the tribes of Banu Rabi'ah, including its townsmen and its nomads, and these groups have agreed upon the following things. 1, that they will adhere to the book of Allah, will call people towards it and order according towards it, and will respond to whoever calls towards it. They will not sell the book of Allah for any price, nor will they take anything as an alternative for the Holy Quran. These two great warring tribes in the areas of Yemen hold on to the Quran, do not take anything else other than it. They will join hands in anyone who opposes it and abandons it. Meaning, from amongst themselves, if someone from amongst these two warring tribes stands up and they want to create a problem from within the community, they want to create friction within the community, both tribes are ordered to stand up against those individuals. They will help one another, their voices will be one voice, they will not break their pledge on account of rebuke or any other kind of angry person or anyone who tries to humiliate each other. If one group tries to humiliate the other one, they will not stand up and support these things. They will stop these things. They will put a halt towards any group that starts warring from within these two tribes if they start to fight again. And they will not allow abusive terms against one another. Subhanallah. Look at the way Imam Ali alayhi salam talks about building peace. Don't use abusive terms. We're learning to make peace between two warring tribes. Don't allow yourselves to abuse each other with your tongue. This pledge is binding on those of them who are present and those of you who are not present. Meaning, if there's anyone from amongst these two great tribes that aren't present here today to agree this, the fact that your tribes have agreed to this, the rest of you must agree to this as well. And it should also fall upon those who are forbearing and even those who are foolish. Meaning that if you find someone who is an ignorant person, it doesn't matter. You're still obliged to fulfill this particular peace treaty. It continues. Along with this pledge of Allah, it's also binding on them. So meaning that whatever you have pledged to me, in general, whatever you have pledged to Allah as well, you must fulfill that as well. Meaning, if you have pledged to Allah as normal as a Muslim, your salah, your zakat, your hajj, and so on and so forth, you're to fulfill the specific peace treaty to me, to each other, and towards your pledge towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Meaning that when Imam Ali alayhi salam, in the final years of his life, made this peace treaty between two warring tribes in Yemen, he didn't just do it because he was the caliph. They in Yemen placed trust in him because he'd already been deputed to them, because he'd already built a relationship with the people of Yemen. His relationship with the people of Yemen go a step further. For example, in Sermon 123 of Nahj al-Balagha, Imam Ali alayhi salam calls people towards the battle in the battle of Siffin. From amongst the army of Imam Ali alayhi salam in the battle of Siffin were 12,000 people from the area of Yemen, from these particular tribes. In fact, it is stated that his whole right wing, the entire right wing of his army in the areas, in the times of Siffin, were all from the people of Yemen. It's stated that Malik al-Ashtar was the one who was the head of that wing of the army. So here we see Yemen, specifically, these tribes of Banu Rabi'ah, these tribes of Banu Hamdan, they had a specific role to play with Imam Ali alayhi salam in the future coming to his leadership, to his imamat, towards his khilafat. And the question shouldn't be posed, well, he just had relationship with them because he was the imam or because he was caliph. That would be a very lazy answer, to just assume that whilst the ummah is in conflict with each other and tribes and people are warring with each other, that Imam Ali alayhi salam could just happen to call upon 12,000 people from Yemen to go and war with him on his side. The fact is that the history of Imam was that he went to the area of Yemen immediately before Hajj, immediately before the farewell pilgrimage. And this deputation towards Yemen was the historical context for the event of Ghadeer itself. So what took place? As the area of Hijaz had fallen under Muslim rule, as Rasulullah had now begun the conquest of Mecca, the idols had fallen, and now the greater Muslim area was within Hijaz, Rasulullah could now look further afield outside of the area of Hijaz to bring people into the Islamic fold. Now, of course, geographically, what is annexed towards Hijaz is, of course, the area of Yemen. And therefore, it makes sense to go and bring such a large denomination of people into the fold of Islam. And so, the first person who was historically deputed towards Yemen to bring tens of thousands of people towards Islam was the companion by the name of Mu'adh ibn Jabal. Mu'adh is a very famous companion. And Rasulullah calls Mu'adh and he says to him, I'm deputing you towards Yemen. You must bring these people towards Islam. And he gives him specific instructions in history. For example, he says, don't dispute with them. Tell them about the goodness that is available to them. Bring them towards the oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Mu'adh ibn Jabal goes towards Yemen, and despite spending several weeks there in Yemen, speaking to Banu Hamdan, he returns back without having brought a single person towards Islam. According to history, the reason as to why he was unable to convert was because he fell down at a particular question. They had asked him about the rights within marriage, the rights of a husband over a father, the rights of a wife over a husband, and so on and so forth. And although he could very comprehensively explain salah and hadith and that, when it came to the tangible rights, Mu'adh ibn Jabal was not able to distinguish, he was not able to demonstrate Islam as being this worthy religion. And as such, he came back unsuccessful from his endeavors in the region of Yemen. At this point, another companion stepped forward to go and bring people towards Islam from the area of Yemen, and that was Khalid ibn Walid. Khalid ibn Walid, very famous companion, was deputed not for several weeks like Mu'adh ibn Jabal. He spent a total of 6 months in Yemen trying to bring people towards Islam. Unfortunately, he didn't bring a single person towards Islam in 6 months. Not a single person, be it from Banu Rabi'ah or Banu Hamdan, came towards Islam. Having eventually seen that there was no progress in the region of Yemen, Rasulullah decided to call Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam and said to him, now I'm deputing you to go towards Yemen. At this point, he writes a letter. And with this letter, the letter is to go to be announced towards Banu Hamdan, and he is to tell the Muslim, the small contingent of Muslims under the banner and the leadership of Khalid ibn Walid, that you have the choice of staying with Ali and seeing what he does in bringing the people of Yemen towards Islam, or you have the choice of coming back towards Medina because we're about to go towards the Hajj, and you can come with us and we'll leave Medina and we'll go towards Mecca for the pilgrimage. It is stated that the majority of companions stayed in Yemen so that they could partake in bringing people towards Islam. Imam Ali alayhi salam comes towards Rasulullah and he begins a discourse that in history begins the entire event of Ghadeer itself. What took place? Imam Ali alayhi salam states to Rasulullah, Ya Rasulullah, I am a young man. Now listen to the words, because we all here know the reasons as to why Imam Ali alayhi salam is not universally taken as being the first or the only successor towards Rasulullah. Normally, the argument is, number one, he was too young, whereas there were elders in the community who could take his position. Or number two, he wasn't a known politician, and therefore in terms of the tribal disputes, he wouldn't have been able to bring people together like other tribal leaders were. Or for example, number three, he had not shown leadership in ways of bringing justice And normally these are the arguments that are placed, that although he is definitely the most knowledgeable companion, the most righteous companion, because he did not have X, Y, and Z, or did not demonstrate in history X, Y, and Z, other companions were more befitting to be the caliph in charge. Here, this conversation and the event of Yemen is the specific answer that takes place as to the history of these particular objections. The statement made by Imam Ali alayhi salam. Number one, Ya Rasulullah, I am very young. One. Two, I have never arbitrated between people. Three, I have never taken the seat of justice. I have never become a judge between people. And therefore, why are you sending me towards Yemen? Now, of course, Rasulullah is going to know best who should be deputed towards Yemen. The fact of the matter is, if there is going to be an objection in history that Imam was not old enough, or Imam wasn't a good politician, or Imam had not demonstrated leadership qualities that were necessary to guide an entire ummah, then the first to say that was Imam Ali himself. Not that he didn't have that capacity. He didn't say, I don't have the capacity. He said, I haven't been given that responsibility before. Now here, the three statements, I am young, one. Two, I have never arbitrated. And three, I have never taken the seat of justice, could be objections that are thrown against Ali historically, because he himself stated that I haven't done these things. Therefore, if he hasn't done these things for a small region like Yemen, how can he do it for the entirety of the ummah itself? Correct? That could be a fair statement levied against someone about this historical situation. Rasulullah responded with the following. He came and he put his hand upon the chest of Imam Ali alayhi salam, and he looked towards the sky and said, Ya Allah, guide the heart of Ali and ensure there is never an error to come from the tongue of Ali. Three objections: age, arbitration, justice. In terms of the reply, Rasulullah didn't even respond to the objection about age. He puts his hand upon the chest and he says, Ya Allah, guide the heart of Ali and make sure there is no error from the tongue of Ali. Imam Ali alayhi salam states as a response to this, from that moment on, I never had a doubt about any of my judgments that came from my tongue, because Rasulullah had prayed for the perfection of my tongue. At this point, Imam Ali alayhi salam leaves to go to the area of Yemen. The companions, as we stated, who had previously been deputed to Yemen to bring them, remained there. Khalid ibn Walid remained there, and the other companions remained there as well. Imam left and he arrived at Yemen. All of history, be you of any sect, is synonymous in saying that on the first day, Imam Ali alayhi salam read out that letter that was given from Rasulullah, and then he led them in prayer. The next part of the morning, one morning, this whole event takes place. Imam Ali alayhi salam gets to Yemen, he leads them in prayer, he reads out that letter, and then a discussion comes about the blessings of Allah, specifically about the oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In that very one morning, it is stated that the entire tribe of Hamdan converted towards Islam. Subhanallah. Mu'adh ibn Jabal, several weeks in Yemen, no one individual comes towards Islam. Khalid ibn Walid and several other companions, 6 months, no one comes towards Islam. One morning with Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam, the entire tribe, the biggest tribe in Yemen, Banu Hamdan, convert towards Islam. Imam Ali alayhi salam stayed there for a period of a few weeks, and he stayed there continuing to give fiqh, continuing to give judgments. If you look towards the chapter in history from Sheikh al-Mufid in his great books of history, Shaykh al-Mufid dedicates entire chapters towards the miraculous judgments Imam Ali alayhi salam gives whilst at that time in Yemen. His judgments became so famous in Yemen that there are entire chapters in history dedicated towards what took place at that period in Yemen. I'll just give you one as an example to show how Imam Ali alayhi salam led in Yemen. One narration says that there was a large pit that was dug in order to capture wild beasts. And that particular pit was made and dug to capture a lion. So of course we know the ferocity of a lion. And as that pit was dug, the lion fell in. Now of course, people who were going to see that lion in that pit, 1, 2, 5, 10, several people gathered around that pit to observe the lion being caught. It is stated that one person stood, and as he peered in to see what was happening with the lion, his foot gave way and he slipped. And as he was about to fall into the pit, he grabbed hold of a second person and pulled that second person into the pit with him. That second person pulled another person in towards the pit, and that third person pulled a fourth person. 4 people fell into the pit. Each and every one of them were killed by the lion. According to the hadith by Shaykh al-Mufid, very famous narration. So they came towards Imam Ali alayhi salam and they said to him, well, where's our blood money? We've had these family members and these individuals die. Blood money should be paid. And therefore, what is the judgment? Of course, this will probably throw most people. Lion has been caught. First person falls in by accident. But as he's falling in, he pulls a second person, who pulls a third person, who pulls a fourth person. All of them are killed by the lion. How are you going to judge as to how the blood money is dispersed between these particular individuals and families? Imam Ali alayhi salam responded by saying, the first person who died, that was a complete accident. It was his fault, but it's an accident upon his shoulders, and therefore there's no blood money to be paid upon him. But he pulled in the second person, didn't he? And therefore there is responsibility from him upon the second person. And the second person pulled in the third person, therefore there's responsibility from the second to the third. And the third pulled in the fourth, and therefore there's responsibility from the third to the fourth. And therefore 1/3 blood money should be paid per person. The second person should pay 1/3 blood money to the third family. The third person should pay 1/3 blood money towards the fourth person. And therefore all 3 people who have been pulled in are paid off through their blood money. And the first person who fell in by accident, there's no blood money for him. It's a very intricate decision, isn't it? Now, we probably wouldn't face that too much today unless you work in a zoo and you're in Iran or Saudi Arabia. But the fact is, he gave the judgment. When Rasulullah heard of this judgment, he responded by saying that judgment is the same judgment as what Allah Ta'ala would have given upon the arsh. So here, Rasulullah praised Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam for his judgment. The point is, historically speaking, many objections are placed towards Amirul Mu'mineen as to why he was not ready to become caliph. He's the most knowledgeable, we accept. He's the most pious, we accept. But his age is a problem. Or the fact that he wasn't a leader yet that could bring about resolve and political leadership amongst communities. The fact of the matter is, there could be no greater example of any companion bringing such a large tribe together and demonstrating all points of leadership other than in the era when Amir al-Mu'mineen was deputed towards Yemen. Age wasn't a matter because Rasulullah didn't even consider it worthy of a response. When it came to the issue about being a judge, Amir al-Mu'mineen was the perfect judge. When it came to an issue about politics and bringing tribes together, Amir al-Mu'mineen didn't have a problem. If he could do it for Yemen when no other companion could do it, why couldn't he do it as the leader of the entire community? And thus Rasulullah had deputed Amir al-Mu'mineen to Yemen to demonstrate his leadership qualities immediately before the Hajj pilgrimage, so that at that time in Hajj and historically onwards, no companion, no historian, no observer could object to the skill set of Ali ibn Abi Talib, because he demonstrated it immediately before the Hajj pilgrimage. Whatever objection you have in the deputation towards Yemen, the entirety of the objection is overcome. Whatever objection you have. But this builds us to the reason as to why the inference friend as opposed to the inference authority. Because it hasn't come yet, has it? Because if you look at the incident so far, with Amir al-Mu'mineen demonstrating his knowledge, demonstrating his ability politically, demonstrating them arbitration-based, it doesn't still coincide with the translation of Mawla as friend, does it? There's no connection between those skill sets and why he was given friendship as an interpretation for the incident of Ghadeer. That comes as he leaves Yemen. When Rasulullah wrote that letter to Amir al-Mu'mineen, amongst the things he stated to him, Ya Ali, upon your return from Yemen, before you join us at the Hajj pilgrimage, return to the Christians and return to the people of Najran and collect the taxes that are owed from the areas of Najran. We just celebrated Eid al-Mubahila, didn't we? Just a few days ago. So of course we all know the incidents of the Christians of Najran and what happened in the locale of Najran. Amir al-Mu'mineen was told, return from Yemen, en route to go to Najran, pick up the taxes. As he picked up the taxes, all the other companions left with him, meaning Khalid ibn Walid, the other several companions left with him from Yemen, stopped at Najran, and then went back to Medina, and from Medina entered into Mecca and adorned themselves with the ihram, ready to enter into Mecca. Amir al-Mu'mineen joined with Rasulullah, finished his Hajj pilgrimage, and went back out of Mecca to pick up those companions who were on the outskirts of Mecca, to enter with them back into Mecca to celebrate the Eid festival with Rasulullah. Can you see the timeline? Eid al-Adha, companions were outside Mecca. Amir al-Mu'mineen has performed his Hajj responsibilities. He goes out of Mecca to collect those companions who are on the outskirts and brings them into Mecca to celebrate Eid with Rasulullah and to finish that sacrifice and go with Rasulullah. A series of despicable events took place. And this was the context behind the inference Mawla as friend as opposed to Mawla as authority. What happened? As those companions who were waiting outside Mecca to enter, when Amir al-Mu'mineen had picked up the taxes from Najran, amongst the taxes were beautiful cloths, long sheets of cloths. You know, sometimes when we go to a clothes store, we see those cloths wrapped around, don't we, in those rolls. Imagine that. Imagine lengthy cloths were given as part of the alms tax in payment towards the Islamic affairs, towards Baytul Mal. As Amir al-Mu'mineen went back out to collect those individuals, they had cut up that piece of cloth, that lengthy piece of cloth, which was for the Muslim Ummah, for the state, and began to adorn themselves in it and put it on for their own ihram. Following me? That piece of cloth wasn't theirs. It was given by Najran to Baytul Mal. Certain companions had cut it up, distributed it for themselves, and decided to wear it for themselves. Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam became angry with this event. And as someone who was responsible to look after that cloth for Rasulullah, for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, for Baytul Mal, disparaged those companions. He gave them an admonition and said, this isn't yours to cut up. It's not yours for you to wear as ihram. This is Baytul Mal's. It doesn't belong to you. You have taken this without rights. And as such, despite that, they continued to wear it and they entered in towards the city of Mecca, and they met up with Rasulullah. Some of those companions were so hurt and so out of favor with Amir al-Mu'mineen's admonition that they held a grudge against Ali ibn Abi Talib. What did they do? They went and sat with Rasulullah and began to complain about Ali ibn Abi Talib. They began to spread lies about Ali ibn Abi Talib. Some of them are so despicable, it would be unbefitting of me to even tell it to you from this platform. But if you want to read them, even in English, go to the last volume of Ibn Kathir's history, and you will see the type of slander that some of the companions went to Rasulullah with and stated about him. I'll give you some of the complaints and some of the responses from Rasulullah. Amongst one of them, very famous, a very beautiful statement. One companion went to Rasulullah and complained about Imam Ali whilst he was in Yemen. We were really tired of Ali whilst he was the head of the tribes and the head of the Muslim Ummah in Yemen, Ya Rasulullah. Why? What did he do so wrong? Ya Rasulullah, every time he was leading Salah, after Surah Al-Fatiha, he would recite Surah Al-Ikhlas. This is the level of complaint. One of the complaints that they used to make, is it that he doesn't know any other surah other than Surah Al-Ikhlas? Ya Rasulullah, every single prayer, night and day, Fajr, Maghrib, Isha, every time we hear him leading Salah, it's always Surah Al-Ikhlas, Surah Al-Ikhlas, Surah Al-Ikhlas. According to the response, very famously, Ali loves Surah Al-Ikhlas like Surah Al-Ikhlas loves Ali. Another complaint made by these people against Amir al-Mu'mineen was that he was so harsh against us. And amongst the things that he did was that he took a second wife from amongst the slave girls and that he did wrong to her. These were the kinds of things that were being levied against Amir al-Mu'mineen to Rasulullah directly. Ibn Kathir, the famous Sunni alim and historian, states a narration that when one companion came to complain about Amir al-Mu'mineen, Rasulullah became so angry at the level of complaint, he actually slapped the man on the thigh in anger and said, "Be quiet, this is your brother. When this person admonishes you because you took from Bayt al-Mal, it's because he doesn't play around with the wealth of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He doesn't take it as his or mine or yours. He does things in a way because it's Allah's wealth and not your wealth. Don't disparage him. Don't say anything against him. He is your brother." In the hadith, the companion states, Rasulullah admonished me in such a way, I became scared to even think something negative about Ali ibn Abi Talib. The question I pose to you as an audience, if 1, 5, 10, 15 people begin to complain about Imam Ali in Yemen and the route back from Yemen to Najran, and Najran towards Mecca, and, the outcome of this event would be that it would spread, wouldn't it, to the rest of those companions. You know how ghiba is? You know how people love to tell tales? You know that if there's already a group of companions that are against Ali, if I come to you and say Ali did X to a slave girl, if I say Ali did wrong to me when I took from Bayt al-Mal, if I say Ali wasn't a good leader in Yemen, if I begin to tell you, by the time it gets to the other person on the other end of the community, that incident has taken on such an evolution that it wasn't even resembling the original incident. Fair? If I tell you, and you tell him, and him, and him, and him, and him, what happens is the entirety of that Muslim ummah congregated in its thousands in Mecca begin to hear negative things about this one man. All the good things that he was proving in Yemen, his age of leadership didn't matter. His ability to bring people together as a politician was clearly greater than any other companion. His knowledge of Islam, his ability to bring about justice as the head of the justice system, all of it's there. All of that is lost, isn't it? Because we would rather listen to negativity than positivity. Who's now going to talk about the miraculous events of Ali in Yemen when I want to talk about him taking a slave girl? As this was being spread by certain companions about Ali ibn Abi Talib, it shows a historical context to man kuntu mawla fahadun aliyun mawla, doesn't it? Because at this point, if you are hearing as a Muslim ummah, Ali did this, Ali did this, Ali did that, at that point when man kuntu mawla fahadun aliyun mawla occurs, it is easier for me to announce that Allah and His Prophet want to make friends with Ali than giving him mastership over everybody else. And thus, historically, there is this pull that takes place. One set of individuals want to point towards Yemen and show how it demonstrates the political leadership of Ali ibn Abi Talib. Another group of historians want to point at the same events and say it shows the political weaknesses of Ali ibn Abi Talib. That when he managed companions, he couldn't manage them properly. And so, the end of Hajj took place. And so, Rasulullah and these thousands of companions left towards an area known as Ghadeer Khum. And at that point, the narration is stated to have come down, Ya ayyuhar Rasul, balligh ma unzila ilayka min rabbik. Deliver, announce, convey what has come from your Lord. For if you do it not, it is as if that you have not delivered the message. And Allah will protect you. And as such, as that narration, or as that verse rather comes down, Rasulullah gathers all of the community together. It is narrated that that sermon took place after Dhuhr in the burning heat. Specifically, it states, the narrations, about how hot it was. To the extent that the companions took an abba, a cloak, and placed it over a tree so that Rasulullah could stand in the shade as he was delivering this long sermon. In his sermon, he states, O Muslim community, O people, have I fulfilled my responsibilities towards you? They all responded in unison, Na'am ya Rasulullah, indeed you have done what you have done and fulfilled your responsibilities. And then he posed a question or a statement to them, and he stated that I am leaving behind me two weighty things, or two memorable things. The first one is the Kitab of Allah, and the second is my family, my Ahl al-Bayt. Do not precede them and do not leave them behind, for they are inseparable from each other. And then he posed his famous question by asking, do I not have more authority over you than you do yourselves? Famously, everybody responded, Na'am ya Rasulullah, indeed, you have more authority than we do over our own selves. At that point, he takes the hand and he raises it high, according to the narrations, to the extent that even the pits could be seen of these individuals. And he states, Man kuntu mawla, fahadun aliyun mawla. Whosoever master I am, Ali is also his master from this day. Allahumma man wali man wala. Oh Allah, we are asking you for this dua, that you protect him, you make friends with him, with whoever else you're making friends of. Take an enemy of whoever is taking an enemy of this individual. And at that point, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reveals the famous verse, on this day have we completed for you, on this day have I perfected for you your religion and completed my favor upon you and made and chosen Islam for you as your religion. Famously, we begin to build a context to Ghadeer, because we understand that the statement, Man kuntu mawla fahadun aliyun mawla, is not just about a linguistic interpretation. One argument is that because the question came before, do I not have more authority over you than you do yourselves? Thus we can interpret Man kuntu mawla fahadun aliyun mawla. But if you don't accept that that question took place in the first place, then the interpretation of man kuntum mawla fahadan aliyan mawla is removed from any linguistic interpretation, and it becomes a wider historical event interpretation. Because companions disparaged Ali, because companions stated that he had fallen short in X, Y, and Z, the interpretation was that no, Rasulullah had to announce his loyalty, his friendship, his love towards Ali, because the rest of the Muslim Ummah began to separate from Ali ibn Abi Talib. Here we begin to understand the historical context behind this event. We would answer a very simple point, and we would say to all those who might be an opponent of that point by saying, indeed, let me take it as friendship. Let me say Ali was appointed as the friend of Rasulullah. Does that take away from any of his achievements within Yemen? Or does that take away from anything that Ali demonstrated in his leadership skills in Yemen? If we want to interpret it as being friendship, then so be it. Who else has been appointed as the friend of Rasulullah? Because we see that he was his brother, we see that he was his son-in-law, we see that he was deputed as his minister, we see that he was deputed as the political envoy towards Yemen. Fine, if we want to conclude that he is the friend of Rasulullah, who else has ever been appointed as the friend of Rasulullah? You may have acquaintances, you may have companions that have seen and spoken and heard, but no one else has been appointed as the friend of Rasulullah. Indeed, he was appointed. That doesn't take anything away from him. And thus, the event of Yemen and the deputation of Ali as the head, the envoy towards Yemen, is the wider context towards his imamate. If I want to see Ali as a political leader, look towards Yemen. If I want to see him as the head of justice, look towards the deputation of Yemen. And thus I will understand man kuntum mawla fahadan aliyun mawla, that he wasn't just appointed for the sake of being appointed. He had demonstrated through Yemen his worthiness of being the Caliph of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And thus for all of us, inshaAllah, as we begin to discuss and we teach our children, the first place we want to start with is the event of Yemen. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make this a joyous occasion for all of us. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for us to be able to have a visitation to the holy city of Najaf this year and every year. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that we have many of our needs to be fulfilled fi dunya wal akhirah. We ask you, Ya Allah, bihaqqi Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam, grant us all of our needs fi dunya wal akhirah. Ya Allah, hasten the reappearance of the awaited Savior. Allow us to be alongside him at all times in our life and in our death. We ask you, Ya Allah, there are many people around the world going through such desperate times. Grant them all a state of security and victory for the sake of Muhammad and Ali Muhammad. Wassalamu alaikum jami'an wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
We have 5 minutes for question and answers if anyone has any questions.
Assalamualaikum Sheikh, excellent talk. Eid Mubarak on this wonderful day. Thank you for clarifying the events preceding the Prophet ﷺ's famous speech. It'd be interesting also to hear your clarification on what happened immediately after that speech. Lots of people say different things, but if you could clarify immediately what happened and the events afterwards.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Famously, we have the tradition that states immediately after having been given the authority and that rank of leadership, the first person, according to much of our history, the first person to go and congratulate him is stated to have been the second Caliph of Islam, Umar al-Khattab, who's narrated to have said, Bakhin, Bakhin, Ya Amir al-Mu'mineen, congratulations, congratulations, Ya Amir al-Mu'mineen, you have become the master of all the believing men and believing women. So the fact that he interpreted the event as being leadership, there shouldn't be anyone else to interpret it outside of that. That was stated to have been the first immediate action. Maybe we could state that what might have preceded this or immediately have come after this was Rasulullah told Imam Ali alayhi salam, go and sit in this tent and accept the pledges and congratulations of everyone. So I don't know whether that pledge came after or whether that pledge came first, but we know those are the two immediate events that took place. A congratulations from Umar and a statement, go and sit in the tent and accept congratulations. That's the first two events. Then according to some of our narrations, there is an individual who comes to Rasulullah and complains about the appointment of Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam and says, is this appointment from you or is this from Allah? Inferring that there might be a difference between the two, which in itself is potentially heretical, one. Two, the statement shows that there was such enmity towards Ali because it shows that maybe this was just a family-orientated issue, nepotism we call it, right? Where it's based within the family. Now again, the question needs to be posed, why was there such enmity towards that appointment? And obviously we just clarified that in the speech, that because things were being stated about Imam Ali alayhi salam, because people were objecting to things that he was doing to bring him down out of jealousy. Certain companions had gone, spent 6 months, couldn't bring a single person. You come along and you go and do X, Y, and Z. Of course, I'm going to be jealous of you. Not of course, but those companions, of course, they were going to be jealous, right? So as such, that enmity spread. So a person came towards him and said, is this appointment from you or is it from Allah? And he stated, this is from Allah. Rasulullah stated, this is from Allah. The companion famously turned away in anger and said, if that is the case, let a rock be falling upon me from the sky. We have the narration that says that based upon the verse, سَأَلَ سَائِلٌ بِعَذَابٍ وَاقِعٍ, that the questioner questioned about the punishment from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that was due to descend. And according to some narrations, that event took place when a stone fell from the sky, landed upon the head of that individual and split him literally in two. And that was the punishment of the person who not only objected, but rather challenged in the audacious way that he challenged the appointment.
Anyone from the sister side?
We have a sister there. Is there a mic on the sister side? Or?
Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam.
When Ali was going to go to Yemen and the Prophet said, oh, inshallah, Allah will guide you.
Yes.
Could you not have just done that to anyone? And it would, because the Prophet would have had his intentions, it would have happened the same way.
It's a very good question. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Could the Prophet have done it to anyone? Absolutely, in theory, the Prophet could have done it to anyone. Normally, we would state that in terms of sanctity of heart, and for one to behold a distinctive level of truth or a distinctive level of spirituality, it requires that person to have been open to those spiritual truths in the first place. Imam Ali alayhi salam has the hadith where he states, wisdom is a tree that is planted in the heart and bears fruits on the tongue. So there has to be a process here that we need to plant the seeds in our heart before it can come from the tongue. It is a natural cause and effect. If, for example, an individual hadn't planted the seeds of humility, sincerity in their heart, and they were going to Yemen for an alternative reason, for fame, for wealth, for authority that would come from that movement, it would not be fair. It would not be within the realm of justice, divine justice for Rasulullah to put his hand on someone else who is going there for a reason unbecoming of his initial deputation. And so if I go there and my purpose of going there is for fame, responsibility, wealth, and Rasulullah in theory could have put his hand upon the chest, but it wouldn't bear any weight, because the reality is that companion hasn't humbled himself through knowledge and discipline and worship to be able to give that to the people of Yemen. So the fact is, it would be a void dua. Would that be a fair point? If I go now, as an example, to Rasulullah and stand before him and I say to him, Ya Rasulullah, make me X, right? We have the dua from Imam Zainul Abidin alayhi salam in Sahif al-Sajjadiyah. وَاجْعَلْنَا لَهُمْ سَامِعِينَ وَمُطِيعِينَ كَمَا أَمَلْتَ. Oh Allah, make me a listener, an attentive listener, and an obedient person to Ahlul Bayt's commands, just as they have commanded me to be. Now, if I don't put in the effort myself to become disciplined, to bear those beauties of their tradition, no matter how much I beg Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I can't really have that put into my heart in the first place. Because there's a gap, isn't there? There's a void between my action and sincerity and me retrieving that. In the same way, because those companions didn't necessarily have that, Rasulullah couldn't have put that into them. Whereas if Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam had demonstrated his worthiness for that dua, then Rasulullah can place his hand upon his chest and ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for that to come from him. Does that answer the question sufficiently? Ahsant.
The last question from brother side.
Sheikh, thank you very much.
An honor.
Is there any more you can say about the relationship between Imam Ali alayhi salam and Khalid bin Walid after Ghadeer?
It wasn't on the best of terms. We have a number of incidents post the death of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, where Khalid ibn Walid is narrated to have done committed murder, and the first caliph, and this is agreed upon by all historians, irrespective of your sect, is that murder took place, and Abu Bakr had not taken him to task on that. Now, of course, Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam, being the seat of justice, which he demonstrated, objectively speaking, demonstrated in somewhere like Yemen, would of course have found murder abhorrent. And I would say to you just very quickly that there wouldn't have been a good relationship between Khalid ibn Walid and Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam at that time. Historically, we probably would see more enmity, to the extent that if you are someone who accepts the event of the attack on the house of Zahra salamullahi alayha, one of the companions named specifically as those who attacked the house of Fatima salamullahi alayha was Khalid ibn Walid. So, of course, if you accept that the death of Zahra salamullahi alayha was directly as a result of that attack, and Khalid being the one to wield the sword, of course, Imam Ali alayhi salam would have had no relationship whatsoever with Khalid ibn Walid after those particular incidents.
Thank you very much. We'll end there. Salawat.
Allahumma salli ala. Can I ask that we give a louder salawat to honor the occasion of this Eid and the coronation ceremony of Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib salawatullah wa salamuhu alayhi.